Everybody's all obsessed. Wall Street Journal said that they've dialed back the idea of giving Jim Harbaugh a long-term extension at Michigan, that they basically pulled that off to see what's going to happen with all of the allegations about scouting. Some people are saying, oh, Michigan shouldn't be allowed to play in the Big Ten title game. Oh, Michigan shouldn't be allowed to make the playoff. I think you have to take the emotion out of it. To me, this is a somewhat analogous, roughly, situation to what happened to Auburn in 2011 when Auburn won the national championship with Cam Newton. What do I mean by that? Auburn basically said, we dare you to prove it, and they kept playing Cam Newton all season long. What is not going to happen, in my opinion, is Michigan is not going to voluntarily pull itself out of title contention. Michigan last won a title, and it was only half a title, in 1997. That year, they split the championship with Nebraska. That was the Charles Woodson, Brian Griese era for the Michigan Wolverines. Right now, Michigan is sitting at 8-0. They're going to smoke Purdue this weekend. Then they go on the road at Penn State. Then they close out the season with Ohio State and Ann Arbor. There is no way that anyone in a position of authority at Michigan is undertaking any action, in my opinion, that undercuts Michigan's ability to win a national championship. Why? Do you want to be the president of a university at Michigan who undercuts Michigan's best title chance in 25 years? Would you ever be able to keep your job? I think the answer is no. So there's only three actors that can do something. One is Michigan. Two is the Big Ten. Big Ten has a brand new commissioner, Tony Petitti, I think is his name, or Petitti. I'm not sure how you even pronounce his last name because he's brand new. I don't know him personally. Let me tell you what I do know. The Big Ten commissioner is not going to put his job on the line in year one as Big Ten commissioner by eliminating one of the two premier programs in his entire conference from an opportunity to compete for a national championship. Big Ten's not doing anything. Michigan's not doing anything. The NCAA is impotent, and it takes them years to undertake any action. So the NCAA is not going to do anything. If they tried to do something, Michigan would immediately go and get an injunction against the NCAA being able to enforce anything during the season. Maybe I'm wrong. Can any of you point me to a high-level championship contending team that got a punishment during the middle of their championship contending run that took them out of title contention? I can't remember any. There are actions taken afterwards, right? The Fab Five, for instance. They took down the banners for the Fab Five. It took years and years for that to happen. So I'm not saying there might not be an argument against some sort of punishment or even a punishment against Michigan that might come in the years ahead. I don't think it's going to happen right now. The NCAA, impotent, powerless, and also there would be an injunction. Immediately, the University of Michigan football team would go to court to get a temporary restraining order against any significant penalty that was attempted to be levied during the season. And by the way, I think they would get it, because if they are later found to be innocent, there would be a substantial injury to Michigan's team because their chances to compete for a championship would be diminished. And I think in an NIL era, you can even argue that contractually these players have an obligation to be able to fulfill the terms of their contract. I think there's a lot of interesting angles. This thing would unite Democrat and Republican politicians in the state of Michigan. There is just no way on the planet, in my opinion, that Michigan, that the Big Ten, or the NCAA are going to do anything. If I were advising Michigan, I would say follow the Auburn model, full speed ahead, say you did nothing wrong, and dare someone to prove to the contrary that you violated an NCAA rule that requires there to be an action taken against you. If I were Jim Harbaugh, I would claim that I didn't know anything about this, And then, look, I think there's a good chance that Jim Harbaugh is riding off into the sunset and becoming an NFL coach right after this season ends. If he ends it with a third straight win over Ohio State and also with another playoff appearance, more power to him. It'd be hard to argue that he didn't create a super successful program at Michigan if those were the terms he left on. Let me also point this out because I do think it's significant as you analyze this overall situation that's in play right now. Why would anyone, again, if you look at the NCAA, if you look at the Big Ten, and if you look at Michigan, the best case scenario for all of them is that Michigan loses. But I actually think if I were Jim Harbaugh, I would use this as evidence of all the world being against us. That's what Auburn did during the Cam Newton story. They convinced their team, I think accurately, that everybody hated them and that the whole world was against them. And they had a transcendent talent at college football quarterback, Cam Newton, who played unbelievably well, was mentally tough, and seemed to genuinely love making his detractors miserable. I was at the game where Auburn came back from, I believe it was a 24-0 deficit, and won on the road in Tuscaloosa. That was against Nick Saban and a Nick Saban defense. To have the ability to come back and win that game after being down 24 points is one of the most impressive comebacks I've ever seen in my life. I think it was fueled by hate. Why wouldn't Michigan take that fuel and use it going forward? I don't think anything's going to happen to them. I think this could even strengthen the Wolverines in their games coming up because most of the time coaches are desperately looking for disrespect. Remember last year Kirby claimed that somebody said Georgia was going to go 7-5? I never saw anybody claim that, but he convinced his team that somebody said it and that nobody expected him to be any good. Nick Saban's been trying to convince his team for 20 years that nobody respects Alabama, even though Alabama's favored in almost every game they ever play. This, to me, is potentially not only not something that's going to derail this season, I think it's something that could bring more positivity to Michigan. Raiders have fired their coach, Josh McDaniel. They're now putting in a brand new quarterback. Everything is being changed in Oakland / Vegas. They're going to be Oakland for a long time for me. I know for a lot of you old heads out there, they're still L.A. The Raiders still have probably the biggest fan base almost in L.A., even though there's 2 L.A. teams there. A lot of the older guys in their 40s and up grew up rooting for the Raiders when they were in L.A. I think Jim Harbaugh makes a lot of sense as the next Vegas Raiders coach. I really do. And I'm going to talk about the Michigan scandal and the Spygate and everything else associated with that. But to me, Jim Harbaugh would win at a high level. He's already done it with the 49ers. Basically, the Raiders fan base, much of them still from the Bay Area as well, I think would welcome Jim Harbaugh. He would solve, I think, a lot of the quarterback issues. Jimmy Garoppolo does not seem to be the answer. The Raiders have been a messy franchise for a long time. Really, they've never hit their stride, I would say, like you thought that they might in the Gruden era. There's always been scandal. There's been a lot of off-the-field issues with their players. I think, I'm just tossing this out there, Jim Harbaugh to Oakland / Vegas, and sooner or later I'm going to get the fact that they're in Vegas right every time. I think he would solve a lot of issues. And I think Michigan's going to go 12-0 because I think they're going to follow the 2010 Auburn. I think I said 2011 Auburn in the last couple of days. Auburn won the title in 2011 in the Fiesta Bowl, outplaying against Oregon. I was at that game. So in my mind, I'm kind of imprinting 2011. That's also the year that I started OutKick as the storyline there. 2010 Auburn team, which won the title, as always happens in college football and the NFL, in a different calendar year than the one in which they played for the most part. I think that Michigan's going to go 12-0. And that this, even with the latest crazy story, which is fun and it's absurd, and I've seen all the memes of this guy on the sideline for Central Michigan, it seems quite clear that Michigan was engaged in a borderline legal process by which they were pursuing all these different sign stealings. I also think it's quite clear that Michigan, the Big Ten, and the NCAA are going to be unable to take action against Jim Harbaugh or Michigan. And I think they're going to follow the 2010 Auburn model. I think they are going to avoid any kind of significant penalty. They're going to beat Purdue. They're then going to go on the road and beat Penn State. And then all of this attention is going to continue to focus on them. And I think Jim Harbaugh is going to be able to use it as evidence of how everybody else is allied against them and how ultimately they believe that that all of this is going to fade behind the winds, just like with Auburn. And it's going to be hard to prove anything. It's going to take years, and I don't believe there's going to be any major consequences. I've got a conspiracy theory for you. Some of you out there may think I'm crazy on this. I don't know what the absolute latest is on the Michigan spy controversy, but I have noticed that suddenly, out of nowhere, ESPN has parachuted in a big way, and they are now leading the charge on something needing to be done to Michigan. Why is that? Well, maybe every single employee that ESPN has that is related to college football or is an opinionist, maybe all of them ended up suddenly with the opinion that Michigan should have a penalty levied against them. Maybe that just happened out of nowhere. Or maybe, conspiracy theory, ESPN is trying to ding the Big Ten because they're upset that they no longer have any Big Ten athletic events. Remember, Fox and CBS, by and large, have pretty much, and the Big Ten Network, which Fox owns, have pretty much all of the Big Ten now. And then Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, they're all in the Big Ten too. So the four biggest brands on the West Coast, ESPN has no connection to, and the entire Midwest, all of those games, ESPN never airs any of them. So is it crazy for me to think? Is it crazy for me to think that as a result, ESPN could be going after the Big Ten in a way they would not if they were still partners with the league? I don't think so at all. I think ESPN is furious that Fox has all of the Big Ten and has boxed ESPN out of the entire network, and that the Big Ten has expanded and added USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, effectively cutting the West Coast off. Now, ESPN's still going to get Stanford and Cal as a part of the ACC, but Stanford and Cal don't move the needle. And then the the Big 12, now with Utah and Arizona State and all that group, now that will be split between Fox and ESPN. But I think they were upset to be cut out. And I don't think this is a crazy conspiracy theory. I think one reason why ESPN has suddenly gone all in on the Michigan Spygate story is because they want to undercut the value of the Big Ten brand, because a huge part of the Big Ten brand, don't mistake it, is Michigan and Ohio State. Do you buy it? I definitely think ESPN wouldn't have gone after Michigan like this if they still had the Big Ten. My personal opinion.